welcome to the Rethink Productivity podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Chintek, Senior Executive Neuro Leadership Coach. Hi, how you doing?
I'm good, Simon. Thank you very much for the intro.
No problem. Great to have you on the podcast, and thanks for taking the time out. So we're going to have a really interesting chat today around how busy people are, why that might be, all those kind of indicators that go with it. But do you want to tell us a bit about yourself first, Chin, your career background and how you got to do your kind of neuro leadership coaching?
Okay, I will. Thanks, Simon. So my name is Chintek. I'm a Senior Executive Neuro Leadership Coach and Action Learning Facilitator, Business Process Consultant. My purpose in life is to make immediate and multiply impact on people I care about and work with. What is neuro leadership? Neuro leadership is using science to transform how people lead and manage self, lead and manage others, lead manage organization. My vision is equipping leaders and managers with the understanding of the brain to make organizations more human. How to make better decisions, how to solve problems more effectively, and more importantly, how to lead scalable change, especially around culture. My vision, Simon, is to make using science to make organizations more human.
When you say more human, what does that imply? That we're not, or that there's general organizations are more robotic?
Yes, I often say this to my clients. I say I'm amazed as to how we forget that we're humans. Uh, when I was growing up, there was this advert called the Duracell battery, where they have this you're familiar with that, right?
The Duracell bunny, yeah.
Yeah. So your buddy keeps going around and round and round and never stopping, right? And that's how I see organizations. We've forgotten that we're humans. We've forgotten how the brains actually get tired, right? And employees and managers, everybody's just working like they're robots. And so my vision is try and equip leaders and managers to pause, to understand how the brain really works, and to appreciate it, and to give people time to breathe, give people time to pause.
And you also mentioned in your kind of opening piece around scalable change. So that feels like something that, as a world, we're changing all the time. We've come through the pandemic. We've got various, unfortunately, wars going on. We've got big electoral change in the UK, potentially big electoral change coming up in the next couple of weeks in the States.
Yep.
Then in work, everything seems to be changing all the time for people just to almost keep their head above water. So is that something we're getting used to, or is that something that's new to us, or is it always been there and we're just trying to do more with less people?
I think that my observation, Simon, is that I see often leaders, managers at the senior level use the word transformation, and they do it interchangeably with change. But many people forget the difference between change and transformation. Change is fixing the past, right? Tweaking some things to make it better, right? Transformation is a whole new state. And I see very few organizations really knowing how to do transformations. They do tons of change, but I'm sure you've seen this as well, Simon. The change doesn't get sustained, right? The change one day, and then the next day people forget about it, or people cannot implement it through, and then they forget about it, then they start all over again. So when I speak about leading scalable change, it is about sustainable, scalable change, which is around, again, the brain, is how do we have people know, with all that noise in their head, like you said, right, Simon, that the world is just crazily noisy, right? There's so many things going on. And the only way that we can lead scalable change is using the term PHS, priority, habits, and system. People need to know what is the number one priority or number two priority. People need to know what is the habit that needs to change. then there needs to be systems that reinforce the change. And what I see often is that those three things are often missed out. People do the drum rolls, people make a lot of noise, but they don't talk about the specific change in habit. Number two is they don't have systems to reinforce the change.
And it's interesting because probably, like you've just described, transformation is always one of those words that makes me shudder a little bit.
Same here.
Unfortunately, lots of people have it in their job title now. But for me, transformation is going from one state to another state, and it's big. It's not chipping away at it. Lots of people do. I'd kind of use evolution and revolution. Lots of people do evolution, so they evolve slowly over time. They don't have a revolution of one state to another in a short space of time, which in effect is your transformational cycle. So people are too busy is the general feeling, isn't it? But too busy doing what?
Too busy. The term I use is busy for nothing, BFN. People are just too busy, and people are not focused. People, one of the things that I see a lot happening is very unclear communication of expectations. Number one. Number two is there's this language issue, right? Everybody's for some reason, their language is task, not outcomes. And that's why I say it's busy for nothing, right? I can be busy for 1,500 hours and yet not achieve the right outcome.
And when you say busy with task, you're probably going to answer it, but that's because we're used to, as leaders, telling people what to do or focusing on the short term.
Few things. Number one is there's a difference between the language. Task is usually associated with managers, Simon, and one of the things I speak a lot about is that we have what we call accidental managers, right? We promote individual contributors who are very focused on the how, not the what necessarily. And then we make them managers. We don't train them. And so they bring along with them from individual contributor language to the manager language. And they always focus on the how, right? Very few times you see a lot of people understand the why to the how. So everybody's just how and how and how and how, and not necessarily understanding the why or the outcome we're trying to accomplish with the how. That's one. Two is outcomes are typically the language of leaders, right? However, again, because we're all accidental, that is something that has not been equipped as we transition individual contributors to become people managers or leaders, right? So they carry that language with them, Simon. And then number two is it just gets multiplied down the organization. So it becomes a organizational culture of tasks, not necessarily outcomes.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that leads, I suppose, quite nicely into the metrics you use to measure that, does it? So if it's a leading metric or a lagging metric?
Yeah, we call it the leading indicator, Simon. Leading indicators are basically, let me step back. Organizations today are over-focused on lag. And lag is too late. The principle that data is 24 hours late is useless because we cannot make up for the time lost. Lag outcomes.
I suppose they'll argue though that you can learn from history. Is that right? Is that why they use those metrics?
Yeah, they can learn from history, and what you see often in organizations when you sit in, Simon, they'll do the typical quarterly operations review, right? And every time they're going to say, oh, we kind of missed here, we kind of screwed up here. And then if you sit the next quarter, they're going to say the same thing.
Yeah.
It's so much waste, right? However, leading indicators, here's the difference, Simon. While a lag measure tells you if you've achieved the goal, a lead measure tells you if you're likely to achieve the goal. So it's predictive, right? Lead measures allow you to shift the focus from the rear view perspective of how did I do a month, a quarter, a year later, again too late, to the current and actionable view of how am I doing, and to me it should be by the hour, that truly fuels execution.
And lots of organizations will focus on things like sales. So I sold X pairs of jeans today and my target was Y, tick the box. Or I didn't sell as many. Well, we didn't sell as many because it was raining, it was too expensive, the competitor had a sale, whatever it might be. So how do you switch that mindset?
We switch that mindset by a few things. I call it the keeping performance on track framework, Simon. And it has one requirement and two elements. The one requirement is disciplined leadership. Leaders need to be very disciplined in following through. Right? You and I have seen many leaders have 1,000 ideas. They throw it into the organization. They don't follow it through. The joke I used to hear from employees is this, Simon. They'll say to me and say, Chintek, one of the ways that I manage up is my manager will come to me and give me 10 great ideas a day, right? And what we do is we just wait. We just wait until the manager remembers that one idea out of 100, then we'll start working on it.
Yeah.
Sounds familiar?
Yep.
And so disciplined leadership is really about that self-discipline to lean into the resistance and emotions, right? It is to stay very temperate and not get, hijacked by emotions, stay focused, stay on the process, ensure systems are in place, and ensure there's a follow through, right? So the discipline leadership is very important so that we don't argue about the rainy weather, argue about, hey, there's something going on and we're all distracted. So that discipline leadership. The two elements that will require execution and keeping performance on track is the first element, is called the breakthrough performance. And the breakthrough performance has three habits. The first habit is back to leading indicators, executing on leading indicators to achieve lag outcomes. Now comes the most important habit, Simon, self-monitoring performance feedback. And it's going to be visual. And the third element is that the third habit is that if I'm on the second habit of visually self-monitoring my targets by the hour, I, the employee or the individual contributor, will know when I am off track. Today, often when you walk the organization, many people don't know where they are in their performance. Many. And so by the time they figure out based on lag outcomes, it is way too late. So with a visual self-monitoring performance feedback, people are tracking themselves, just like your smartwatch, right? You know how many steps you've taken, and you realize that you're missing 2,000 steps, you make up for it, right? So it's the same principle.
And that then focuses people to work smarter, not just longer hours or take
Correct.
on more bits.
Correct. Then the second element, there's a discipline leadership requirement, two elements. The first element is breakthrough performance. Then we need a second element, which is the culture of execution. I call it the habits of execution. And today, Simon, what I see happening is, let's take a simple thing called problem solving, right? One of the things that I do a lot with people is I'm in a room with 25 people and I say, everybody, write for me the steps you take in problem solving. And guess what, Simon? It ranges from 2 steps to 10 steps. Nobody is on the same structure. Nobody is on the same language. So how do people work effectively in teams when they're not using the same structure?
Yeah.
Right? And so what I teach people is we gotta have habits which needs to be transferable, repeatable, and predictable. So they need to be in structured frameworks with methodologies that we need to teach every single employee. So when they're trying to problem solve with two other colleagues, they are on the same page.
So there's a lot around getting a solid platform for people to be almost talking the same language, understanding
Yes.
the same boundaries, working to the
Yes.
same
Yes.
principles.
Yes.
And then once people are in that state, what kind of breakthroughs do you see?
Well, I'll give an example. When I was in a factory, we did this with manufacturing operators who had like 6 years of education. Many of them don't speak English. This is a factory in Penang, Malaysia,
Mm-hmm.
and we did this program where first we equipped every single manufacturing operator to understand the difference between poor quality and good quality. Number two is then we began to teach them how to work effectively and efficiently in their workspace in terms of the whole science of how they work. And then in front of each and every operator, we gave them a P and Q chart, productivity and quality chart. And then we taught them how to visually track themselves. And they did that by every hour. Now, here comes the big important part. The production supervisor was taught that they have to walk the floor very regularly. They have to check on everybody's work, especially the tracking. And the only role that they must play is to give positive feedback. They cannot give negative feedback to those who are not hitting the target. They only give it to the people who hit the target very loudly, specific, positive, pure feedback. And guess what happens, Simon? The people who heard the feedback, who are not on target, worked harder to achieve target.
Yeah.
Secondly, by the end of the first week, we already increased our productivity by 50%, reduced defects by 35%.
So lots of upside from a productivity point of view, better quality for the customer, and
Yes.
clearly
Yes.
more capacity for
Yes.
colleagues if needed.
Yes. And the principle, Simon, is that, the idea of the person who's producing is the person who is self-inspecting,
Mm-hmm.
right? Today, there are many instances where people who do the work don't inspect their work. It's passed down the line to someone else to inspect the work. And by the time they discover the defect, it's too late and it's too expensive.
So there's a big element here of self-management and all this, isn't there, in the self-evaluation piece of taking ownership
Yes.
of your work.
Yes. Pride,
And
right? Pride, taking ownership of the work, and basically self-discipline.
and did some leaders struggle with that because they feel like they're losing autonomy?
In the initial period, yes. But eventually, when they saw the results, they cannot help but saying, hey, this works, man.
And it must make their life easier because, again, back to the initial part of the conversation, they'll be busy doing lots of things. So the fact that they've got teams that are empowered to self-check and self-rectify to a degree must then flow upstream to them.
Yes. One of the things I use a lot is giving people time back, right? If we can reduce rework, if we can reduce poor quality, if we can reduce better time management, if we can reduce useless meetings with no agenda that runs for hours, the idea is to give people time back.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the most valuable gifts you can give somebody, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So I think you've got one more thing you'd like to share.
Yes, Simon. One of the biggest challenges with people working, people are very busy and running around, is the thing called biases. We have 155 unconscious biases.
Mm-hmm.
And what the Neuro Leadership Institute has done is to summarize the 155 biases into the word called SEEDS. SEEDS stand for similarity, expedience, experience, distance, and safety. And let me unpack that so that the listeners can be more aware of it. I think it's a very useful tool that can be used to pause and have people think and be able to overcome the biases. Similarity bias is a tendency to view people who look or think like us more favorably than people who are different. Experience bias is a tendency to rush to conclusions in an effort to minimize cognitive effort. Experience bias is a tendency to believe that how we see the world is inherently truer than someone else's perspective. Distance bias, the tendency to assign greater value to those things that we perceive to be closer to us rather than further away. Safety bias, the tendency to over account for negative outcomes instead of positive ones. Simon, these biases, especially the experience bias and the expedient bias, especially expedient bias, people are running around really busily, busy for nothing, is because of that expedient bias. I see so often in organizations. Uh, the experience bias is again accounting for why people do what they do because they think whatever they see is truth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And nothing comes inside. The safety bias is the one that basically allows for people to not be able to say no. One of the reasons for the busyness, I call it the vicious cycle of yes. Everybody is saying yes to really too many things. They don't know how to say no. Managers, middle managers included, because they don't want to be seen as someone not committed or they don't want to be seen as someone not having the capacity to do more. I call it the vicious cycle of yes. And what we need more, Simon, is to teach organizations the power of no done correctly. Not to stop organizations from functioning, but being more clear about what to focus on in terms of execution. And seeds is one of the biggest contributor to why people are so busy and people not being able to negotiate for deadlines, people not being able to take things off the plate. And one of the things I'm teaching organizations is the act of subtracting. Today we're adding and adding and adding. We need to learn how to subtract, Simon. Take things off people's plates.
Back to the age old less is more.
Yes. Easier said than done, but absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody's priorities more important than everybody else in there, and you get back to those competing priorities in large organisations. And yeah,
Correct.
You're right. There are lots of times when I suppose we all reflect and think, yeah, I knew at the time I probably should have said no or pushed back and challenged the timeline, but for whatever reason you didn't.
Yeah, I hear so often, people tell me, I don't think the CEO will allow us to negotiate. I don't think the CEO will allow us to say no. And I said, seriously?
Yeah. Then some of that's, like you say, the bias or the preconditioned ideas that have come through from history.
Correct. So my recommendation is organizations should embrace the fact that we do have this unconscious bias, and organizations should actually use this language. So for example, Simon, you and I can be in a meeting, and then all of a sudden, because we have agreed to use the language of C's, I can go, hey, Simon, I just observe you're kind of on your experience bias.
Yeah.
Right. And then bam, right? So Simon just stops and say, oh, yeah, you're right. I'm really sticking to my truth, and I need to listen to other people's truth, right? So it's very powerful for us to embrace it and then for us to use it right. That's what I wanted to share.
Perfect. Good advice. And again, hopefully people can take that in their day-to-day and will reach out if they want to find out more. We'll pause there because I'm sure we could talk for a lot longer about all the various examples and ways of working. If people have been inspired by this conversation, it's kind of sparked some interest, where's the best place for them to find you, Chin?
On my email and on my LinkedIn, as well as my podcast and YouTube channels.
Perfect. So we'll put a link to your LinkedIn profile in the show notes so people can click through and then find all the other information there for you. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat. A really interesting episodes, made me think about doing a few things differently as well. So I really appreciate your time, and we'll catch up soon.
Hey, Simon.